The 1960s are famed for many things, let alone the World Cup. It was also a decade where some seriously good whiskey was distilled. And we've got nearly 30 1960s vintage bottles on the market at the shop. Now, I thought what would be quite interesting to do would be to take a look at 5 of my favourite of these bottles. And, you know, on the shop, they're ranging between 157 and nearly £7,000. And in this video, I thought I'd cover sort of like the lower to middle end of the spectrum on these, but there's some really awesome bottles. And the first one, let's just jump in. It's this. Well, let's put it down on here. We've got a new setup, haven't we? New camera up here so you can see what I'm talking about. And we've also joined by Western Writing Implements in the Age of the Quill Pen by Michael Finley. Yes, I have some weird books. So what's the first bottle that we're talking about then? Well, some of you may be able to guess. If you just saw that Gothic S, you might think it's a Springbank, but you'd be wrong. It's a Signatory Vintage. And it's a Glenfarclas 1964 30-year-old Signatory Vintage miniature. Now, this one's really well presented. It's in its original little slipcase and its original box as well. But what is Signatory Vintage and who sort of started it? Well, it was founded by Andrew and Brian Symington, and it was started in 1988. Prior to this, Andrew was an assistant manager of the Prestonfield House Hotel in Edinburgh, and there's some seriously legendary whiskies that they released independently. Now, during his time there, he must have thought there's more fun in independently bottling whiskey, so they soon invested in their own warehouse and bottling line, and they made and bottled some of the most legendary whiskies that have ever hit the market. Their earlier bottles are dumpies, but they also produced a huge amount of miniatures, and this is one of them. Now, as you can see here, it was distilled on the 18th of the 12th, 1964, and bottled on the 4th or April 1995. So it's a 30-year-old Signatory Vintage from the Glenfarclas distillery. I'm a big lover of the Glenfarclas whiskey, and guess what? Whiskey Fun rate this one insanely. This is a 95-point whiskey. 95 points, that's insane. That's better than Black Bowmore's. That's better than pretty much everything that's on Whiskey Fun. And this is £157, this miniature. So I'm gonna put my money out there. If this hasn't sold within 24 hours of this video coming out, I'm going to buy it, because £157 for a 95-point whiskey is incredible. Now, it's interesting to note on these Signatory Vintage bottles that when these were released, they were sort of quite cutting edge at the time. They gave the consumer a heck of a lot more information than they would normally have found on a bottle. So as you've seen, we've got the full distillation date, we've got the bottling month and year, we've got the cask number, so it's from a sherry butt, 1996. And bottle number 20 of 870. Now, that 20, that is handwritten. Every single one of these numbers on the bottles, like the limited edition numbers, were handwritten. So that would have been a huge undertaking. Now, it really is, you know, it's not a bottle to add to your collection in terms of like investment. Well, it could be, but this to me is something that you need to buy to drink. It's 95-point whiskey. Yes, it's expensive, £157. Split it between 2 friends. Have you got a special event coming up? Buy it for that. Treat yourself. And like I say, if none of you have bought this within 24 hours of this video coming out, then I'm going to buy it. So you've got 24 hours notice there. So the next bottle that we're going to take a look at is this, and it is probably my favorite looking bottle in this entire lineup. It's a Dalmore 1963 15-year-old, distilled November 1963 and bottled November 1978. This whiskey was distilled 60 years ago. How terrifying is that? That is pretty scary. But the whiskey in this one, you know, this is a big step up. This is £1,801, worldwide shipping available, £1,801. It's not a cheap bottle of whiskey, but it's bloody rare. It's really rare. We can only ever find this bottle appearing at auction 10 times. And I think one hammered at Whiskey Auctioneer recently for 1,880. So put your commission on and everything like that. Well, this one seems like a very good buy indeed. Now, this is by Cadenhead. It's the dumpy style bottle. You can see bottled by William Cadenhead, 18 Golden Square, Aberdeen, Scotland. But who is William Cadenhead? Well, again, this independent bottle sort of can trace its roots all the way back to the mid 19th century. So in 1842, George Duncan founded a business in Aberdeen, like a wine merchants and whiskey merchants basically. And then William Cadenhead joined soon after that and took over after George's death. Now, it remained a family business until 1969 when it was sold to J&A Mitchell, who were essentially Springbank, who were essentially another family business. Now, they used to bottle mostly blended whiskey, I beg your pardon. They used to bottle mostly blended whiskey. And then in 1977, so not long after they were taken over in 1969, when they released this dumpy range, and that period between 69 and 77 is sort of like the transitional period where they started to go more along the lines of single malts, even though you can still buy some seriously good blended whiskey that they do, like the 7-Star, we'll put that on screen now, you can still go and buy that directly from them. Now, as I've said, this dumpy range was started in 1977, and we can see here, this was bottled November 1978. So this is one of the earliest bottlings from this dumpy range. Now, personally, I love typography. Personally, I love quite weird designs. Like I really like the design of these labels. The Dalmore is funky as hell. It's all just really gorgeous. Now, some of the points to note on this label. We're labelled at 26 2/3 fluid ounces and 75 centilitres. And we're labelled at 80 degrees proof and 45.7 ABV. Now, why is that? Well, you've got to remember on the 1st of January 1980, we switched over from the imperial to the metric system. So because this bottle was bottled in 1978, we knew the laws were going to be changing. Now, imagine if you'd bottled this in 1978 and you hadn't sold all your bottles by the last day of 1979. Well, as soon as this changeover occurred, 1st of January 1980, you wouldn't have been able to sell this unless you had the metric equivalents. And this is why at the end of the 1970s, you end up with this dual bottling number format. So 26 2/3 fluid ounces being the equivalent of 75 centilitres. And yeah, there it is. It's an absolutely stunning whiskey. It's 91 points on Whiskey Fun. It's £1,801. It's not cheap, but it is an absolutely stunning whiskey. Right, we're going to start upping the ante now. Jumping up in price a fair bit, £5,239. Well, what does that buy you? Well, that buys you this. A Macallan 1966 18-year-old. Quite rare to have the original box. These boxes, seldom come with the bottles. And inside, there we go. We've got a really nice example, and you can see here, level just above the label here. It's a really beautiful bottle, and obviously it's part of the 18-year-old series. So the 18-year-old series started in 1984 with a very, very rare 1965 vintage. This is from the 1966 vintage, and it's from 1984 as well. And this is a year after the anniversary malt series started. So the anniversary malt series started in 1983, and then the 18-year-old series started. Now, the 18-year-old series is legendary. It's one of the longest, if not the longest running distillery bottled age statement series. It's still going today. But there's a few interesting points about this 18-year-old series and this era of bottling in particular that makes it interesting. So on these 18-year-olds, you get the 18-year-old age statement here. You also get the year that it was distilled in, 1966, and then you also get the year that it was bottled, 1984. Now, what's happened with the modern releases of the 18-year-old is they've dropped the distilled year. They simply have the age statement, 18 years old, which is the age of the youngest whiskey in the blend. So there could be 25-year-old whiskey in here, but the youngest is 18 years old, and the year that it was bottled. Now, the reason why they've dropped the distilled on the modern releases is that it's much harder to try and get all of that stock from one particular year, but it's easy to tell you when it was bottled. So for instance, the 2022 might contain 18-year-old whiskey from several different vintages, but it's all been bottled. So this, by removing that distilled in feature, it makes it a bit more easy to produce commercially. Now, this is a really beautiful bottle, really good condition. It's just a stunning bottle, really, and it would be a great collection to anyone. Now, one thing that people don't really know about the 18-year-olds and us and my business is that, do you remember in the year 2020, there was a story about an 18-year-old vertical that a guy had been bought every year for his birthday, and then he sold it to fund his house purchase? Well, that was us. We brokered that sale. Matthew, hello Matthew if you're watching, absolute legend, and his father as well. He His father had the foresight to buy him a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan every year for his birthday, and then we brokered that sale. So that was our little claim to fame in 2020, which was quite a terrible year all around, wasn't it? Right, we're jumping down in price now, more than 50% cheaper than the last one. And this one, let me just get it up onto the desk here, and here it is. It's a Banff 1966 Gordon and MacPhail bottling. It's just a stunner. Like, it really is just a stunner, this one. This is 49-year-old whiskey in here for £2,101. What, I mean, like, what a bargain, relatively speaking. And Gordon and MacPhail and Banff are quite interesting, but first of all, let's take a look at the bottle. So this is part of the Rare Ode series. So it's quite nice, tasting notes and things on the back. Distillation year 1966 and bottled in 2015. And it's got this nice little button popper. I'll have to tip it upright first of all. Just take this one out. And there you go. It's in this nice sort of like presentation sort of stand style box. And then you can take the bottle out, and what a beauty it is. So distilled at the Banff Distillery in 1966, 45.2% ABV, and bottled in 2015, and more gubbins on the back. But really the interesting thing with this particular bottle is the story of Banff. Now, Banff is sort of like one of the most unlucky distilleries in history. It was set up in 1824. It was pretty much destroyed by a fire in 1877. Fine, we're resilient, we'll build it up again. 1941, the Luftwaffe come along, bomb one of the warehouses, huge fire. The sheep, allegedly, all end up completely inebriated because of all the whiskey that's come out of there. And then in 1959, we've recovered. Another fire, another catastrophic fire. And then it was mothballed in 1983. And guess what? Just before it was about to be knocked down, it set on fire. Now, that's either bad luck or really, really, really bad health and safety measures. And excluding the bombing, it is, because that was bad luck. It is just terrible health and safety, that, isn't it? But anyway, it's a Gordon and MacPhail bottling, and Gordon and MacPhail, again, the industry owes a lot of credit to Gordon and MacPhail. They're the ones that helped keep many of these distilleries in Scotland afloat during the war years by continuing to purchase as they would have done. You know, they honoured all of their purchases. And that is why the majority of these super old Macallan releases, like the Red Collection and the Reach and things, have almost certainly come from G&M stocks. Now, this really is a nice bottle of whiskey. It was only released in 2015, so it's nowhere near as old as some of the other bottles that we've looked at today, but it is a really nice whiskey. No more Banff can be made ever. The distillery's disappeared. It's not like Port Ellen, it's not like Brewer, and it's not like Rosebank, which are coming back online. This is a genuine ghost distillery. It will never come back to life. And the stocks, one day we're going to get to a point very soon where all Banff stocks are going to have been bottled. Now we're coming on to the final bottle from this lineup, and arguably it's one of my favourites, or one of the ones that I've got the biggest soft spot for, and it's an Aberlour 1964. Why have I got a soft spot for it? Well, it's £969, so it's relatively affordable. It's not affordable, people, but if you're watching this channel, you know we talk about these high-end whiskies, and in the scheme of what else we've seen today, by comparison, it is affordable. So jump in the comments if you want to abuse me, but this is relatively affordable compared to the other bottles that we've looked at today. Now, I love Aberlour. They don't produce many age statement whiskies. You know, if you think of the Abuna series, none of that's age statement. And remember that we brokered the sale of the big Abuna vertical back to the distillery a couple of years ago. So I've got a big soft spot. I love their sherried whiskies. I love the distillery. The staff are amazing. And if anyone's watching this from an investment perspective, Chavasse Brothers have put £88 million into revamping the Aberlour and Milton Duff distillery. Now, it's no surprise that the prices have started to bolster for Aberlour recently. And when, goodness knows when the renovations are going to be complete, but in several years when that's complete, I do think we're going to see a jump in appreciation for Aberlour, simply because you've got this visitor centre connection and you've got this greater luxury brand exposure with what Chavasse are doing. Now, the whiskey. Look at it, like it's an amazing bottling. Like any bottle that you keep under lock and key, you know is going to be good. And it's really nice presentation too. Let's take our stock label off here. Now, it's pretty simple. 1964, it's 25 years old. And, you know, you compare it to these Macallans, you know, the designers in the day weren't exactly breaking any boundaries here. Neck label with the age statement on, cream laid paper, label with a gilt border, you know, it's very similar, isn't it? But it's, in some ways, it's absolutely timeless. And it's, you know, one of 10,000 bottles, which isn't a huge amount, but so this is bottle number 5,631 of 10,000 bottles. So it's, yeah, it's quite a high edition, but let's just sort of do the maths on that. So you've got 10,000 bottles by times 0.75 litres, so 7,500 litres of whiskey were needed. Divide that by, let's call it they were using hogsheads for this, and let's assume that there was 180 litres in there. You know, they had 41 25-year-old casks in 41-year-old hoggies there. So it really is a beautiful bottling. Now, there's some really interesting information here on this bit here and on the back of the label. I find it really interesting, and I'm going to read it out to you in a second because I think it's really interesting. But if you want to end the video there, head to the Market at the shop, go and buy these bottles if you want them, and if not, stick around because we're going to read this out because I think it's quite fun and interesting. So in here, on the inside of the box and on the back of the bottle, it says, in 1964, the Beatles were having a hard day's night. Lyndon Johnson was in the White House by a landslide. Harold Wilson in number 10 by a hair's breadth. In Aberlour Village Distillery, manager Ian Mitchell received important news he was hoping for. While dress designer Genrich was raising temperatures with a topless swimsuit, farmers in the Garden of Scotland harvested barley under blue, balmy skies. Aberlour's distiller crushed the ears between his palms and passed them round. Everyone agreed that it was a crop of outstanding quality. As the Highlands sun turned into a watery autumn gold, Olivia dazzled the Othello and Mariner 4 roared off to photograph Mars. By the time the trouser suit was born, the cool waters of the Spey were running outside the distillery gates with an exceptional purity. The year had brought reports of an Aberlour's shy salmon opening sporting themselves in the clean water. Even the peat had a richness more mellow than anyone could recall. Older villagers swore there was something special in the air. The windmill closed and Mary Pottams prescribed a spoonful of sugar. Winston Churchill made his farewell speech to Parliament. Sonny Liston failed to come out for the 7th, and Khrushchev went out for the count. In the quiet of our distillery, where the time moves more slowly than the world outside, there was unusual anticipation. Nature had conspired to lend a hand. The year's harvest, resting safely in oak casks, promised to be a classic single malt of superb vintage. In 1964, we failed to win the Ashes and the America's Cup, but struck gold in the Tokyo Olympics. 25 years on, Aberlour's unforgettable year has reached an exceptional maturity. It has been sniffed and sampled by the most critical of connoisseurs. We now believe with great confidence we too have made our own contribution to history. So there you go. They made great whiskey. Are they waffling superlatives? No. Look on Whiskey Fun. It's a 92-point whiskey. And I just think it's a lovely bit of context, you know, to sort of put into perspective when and the conditions when this whiskey was being made and when it was being bottled as well. You know, this was at a time when the industry was completely different. And for that reason, this is my favourite bottle in this 5-bottle lineup.